Hello, I'm Mischievous Marcinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and all of the annuals, which I say do not count, especially when my co-host Dan Gavazin is here. I love to just rub his face in about all the annuals not counting, but owning Amazing Fantasy 15.
And and I am the available Alan Schurstel. I bought Amazing Spider-Man number 257 with the Puma on the cover off a spinner rack the summer I turned 10. And other than a period from late high school to the end of college, I've read it every week when it's released ever since. I sat out everything from late Michelini through the Clone Saga, and I rejoined in the Mackie Byrne reboot, which was not a great choice. But I'm glad to be here, and I do not own these issues because I, unlike Mark and Dan, have a healthy relationship with my hobbies.
Excellent. Well, Alan, welcome back. I guess we should say Dan is currently moving across the country. The last time, Alan, you were here, Dan had a baby, so like you are always here when Dan is doing major life stuff. But I love having you here. I love having your voice. I love that we can kind of like Gen X together. How you doing? How's things?
I'm good. I am good, Mark, and you're looking good, man. You look like so trim and tight. You're very impressive. You got a very Spider-Man-esque physique these days, and I like classic 616, not the others. And I think that's cool. I realize that I've been coming on the show so long, I think we've stopped saying like who I am or what else I do. And so I don't really have anything to plug, but I'm a critic and writer and editor, and these
Sure.
days I'm at Publishers Weekly, and I also cover jazz for the New York Times, which is not something you expect to say when you grow up in Kansas reading Spider-Man. And I gotta say, I feel a little bad being here this week. I mean, I'm glad to see you. But I mean, this week of all weeks, because this is the first episode after the announcement of the news of Zeb Wells' upcoming departure from Amazing Spider-Man, and of course, listeners to this show have been tipped that this is going to be coming. Like you guys have made it very clear this is likely coming soon. But in a week like this, I feel like listeners deserve the excitable speculations of Dapper Dan Gavazden. They deserve that, not the kind of over-it grumblings that I will be bringing. Dan would have all sorts of clues to tease out about the schedules of Josh Williamson or Joe Kelly or whoever, and he would have stories about stalking Zeb Wells at the comic shop, and then he would share with us, as we're talking about this issue, he would share with us the complete history of Ben Reilly and psychosomatic goo, and I'm not doing any of that.
Well, Alan, all I could say to that is, as someone who has like work in the morning here in the East Coast, we usually record these in the evening. I am grateful for your lack of desire to just pull out the conspiracy board and go for 2 hours tonight. So we're gonna have a neat and tidy episode of Amazing Spider Talk, which of course is the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk. You like that transition, Alan? Did that go like well for you? Good punch there?
It does, and I'm actually going to pause before I move into the next one, because there's one more thing I want to say. Just after you applauded me for keeping it tight, I'm going to go off. Before anything else, I just want to take a second. And with all earnestness and sincerity, I want to tell you and Dan how much I appreciate the work that you guys do. And I want to make sure that the listeners understand that it is work. You guys put in the work that the best critics put in. And by that I mean, the best critics are the one who actually think about the books and stories that we love and the craft of them, and think about them more seriously than the rest of us usually do, than I usually do, certainly when it comes to Amazing Spider-Man. And I appreciate that you guys actually ask that the time that we spend with these stories be meaningful rather than just habit or ritual or just something we get mad at because the continuity is not what we want it to be. I will admit that sometimes I wonder when I'm reading it, out of habit, out of ritual. Sometimes I wonder if this week's Amazing Spider-Man is really worth the effort of real criticism. And I especially wonder that because it's incredibly difficult, I think, for creators like Zeb Wells or Nick Spencer to tell exciting, engaging Spider-Man stories when they are clearly being given asinine mandates from above, like kill Miss Marvel, or break up Pete and MJ in the most convoluted way possible, where neither is at fault, but everyone feels kind of soiled by the whole thing. And so sometimes I'm like, why does it really warrant real critical thinking? And then I listen to you guys, and I always feel enlightened and rewarded afterwards, even if I do feel like you guys have been a little hard on the last couple issues. So as a critic, I admire and respect the work that you guys put in. But I also appreciate it deeply as a fan who can't always be bothered to put in that work myself with these books. And one last thing, we're gonna proceed in a second, I promise. I want to point out and celebrate the fact that you both do it while modeling, despite my joke a minute ago, you both model like a healthy, mature, grown-up relationship with your hobby, with your interest. And that is wild, considering that you both got into this out of some bonkers Pokemon catch-them-all collectors mentality that makes zero sense to me.
Well, Alan, first of all, flattery will get you everywhere. And second of all, obviously, thank you. You know, I joke. I was talking to a couple of people who are not affiliated with the show or our Patreon or anything, and I said, yeah, you know, Dan, my usual co-host, he's out. I'm gonna have a real critic on the show now, so I have to you know, be on my best behavior. So you know, obviously, you know, those words coming from you mean a lot, and you know, as always, we have infinite respect for the lens that you bring to this show, and I'm looking forward to the next couple episodes. I mean, you know, we love Dapper Dan. I know, like, the Slack is going to be like, you know, without Dapper Dan, Mark doesn't go in there. What are we to do? Like, this is like, you know, this is like an orphaned ship right now in terms of our podcast fandom, but we're going to have some fun, and I'm looking forward to it.
All right, if you want to swing along with Mark and Dan, and occasionally me, the rek-rap of this trio, on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app, and leave a review to help spread the word about the show.
This podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members, the ones I just insulted a few seconds ago. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keeping this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon.
Today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 52. This issue was written by Zeb Wells. The cover features artwork by Ed McGuinness and Marcio Menyz. The interior panels feature pencils by Ed McGuinness and Todd Nauck, inks by Mark Farmer, Todd Nauck, and Wade von Grawbadger, and colors by Marcio Menyz and Erick Arciniega, and of course letters by VC's Joe Caramanga. This issue was first released on June 19th, 2024.
Alan, all right, here we go. We are in issue 52 here. This is part 3 of this arc. What are your overall thoughts on what we experienced here in this exciting 24 pages of comic book?
I really do hope it's Spider-Goblin no more. And I mean, I don't mind Spider-Goblin. I mean, I agree with you guys from your previous reviews that it's a little redundant, you know, with the other kind of dark Peter we had recently. Also redundant with Chasm. Also redundant with rek-rap. It's redundant, but I strongly suspect that part of the job of being the writer of Amazing Spider-Man these days is to generate as many licensable, like, spider variants as you possibly can. It's like what covers were in the 90s. You know, we're gonna have a foil Spider-Man soon. So I feel like I can't take much of what's happening in this book seriously as an ongoing story arc with themes or ideas that matter or characters who can develop and change in ways that I might most comic book series that I'm reading. In ways that I might with something from Image or like, you just can't do that anymore. But as the 953rd, is that where we are? I don't know how many of them.
Or 953rd. Yes, that sounds, yes. Or no, might
As
be
the
even more than
900
that. I don't know. Whatever. Yeah, it's close enough.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
We're close to 1,000 of these. 1,000 stories improvised by creative teams working at a corporation, trying to make it make sense on the fly, trying to deal with all the nonsense. I think it's a pretty fun comic. I can't follow any of the mechanics of it. The spear, the sins, none of it. I'm not gonna like stick my face in the fan of like trying to figure all that out the way Dapper Dan might. But I don't know, man. I just found like page to page, beat to beat, this improved on the last issue. The last issue improved on the previous issue, and 50 was, I thought, a highlight of the run so far. I don't believe any of this. I don't think any of this really matters in any fundamental way to the history of Spider-Man, but if there are 952 other issues of Amazing Spider-Man, I can attest that at least 600 of them are much worse than this.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. For me, like this specific issue, I mean, there's definitely like some strong middle chapter energy going on here where, there is a lot happening, but like when you actually kind of like look at the playing field at the end of this issue, it's like the pieces have just kind of moved up the board ever so slightly. But like with that being said, like, we and we'll talk about this in a little more length later. And I know you talked about it in the intro, Zeb Wells is nearing the end of his run here. And, I think this specific comic is a testament to how Wells has just been able to kind of just keep his story moving. I mean, even if it's not moving in great leaps and bounds, it's moving. Like I don't feel like much is like stuck in neutral or going backwards. This specific arc, like you said, it progressed from 50 to 51 to here. There is a fair bit of nonsense which I'll get into, and you can parry it away or just shrug your shoulders about it, Alan. It's all good. But at the same time, like I maybe this is just like the low bar of standards talking, but like you said, it's moving, it's fun. And it's the narrative is staying within the confines of, I think, of what it's supposed to be. I don't feel it's like going off in any far-flung direction. I mean, does that sound like a fair assessment from your end?
Yeah, I agree entirely. I feel like nothing in this issue wasted my time in terms of the story it's telling.
Yeah.
Maybe the story overall is a waste of my time, but like I said, I've been doing this since number 257.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like every one of those, every time a supporting character comes in or somebody else surprises us by showing up, like rek-rap or the arms or what else is going on, it all feels like it's getting somewhere. None of it feels like wheel spinning. And it does definitely have not only a bit of middle chapter syndrome, it has, as you're implying, late in the run syndrome. It definitely feels like okay, we're going to get these toys back in the box, and we are going to finally pay off Chasm in a meaningful way. We are finally going to maybe either eliminate rek-rap or enshrine him into the supporting cast. Maybe he'll be hanging out at the Coffee Bean. But it feels like things are being taken care of. We're going to finally deal with these sins, whatever is going on there. And I got to say, I think 4 times in the history of Amazing Spider-Man, the book has entirely spun out and become literally insulting to readers, due to behind-the-scenes ugliness and confusion. As you guys have covered a lot on the show, the DeFalco Friends Hobgoblin stuff, then, of course, the Clone Saga, which I just can't wait for you guys to get to. The Mephisto stuff, and of course the end of the Spencer run, which weirdly that one annoyed me more than all the others combined, because it just seemed like we're too late in history for it to be this bad.
Yeah.
Everybody's too smart and knows all the earlier mistakes. I was worried that the Wells run might be headed toward a similar fate, especially when we get nonsensical convolutions like the Vanishing Children and all of that. But no. Not only does this mostly make sense, despite the muddledness of, the spear and all that nonsense, but page-to-page storytelling, it's inventive, it's vigorous, it's pretty well crafted, and it feels to me like what is the baseline, at least, it's hitting the baseline of what I want out of these books. which is it is the work of creators trying to tell the best story they can with whatever's going on in the corporate office and with the threads they've inherited and the threads that they've developed. They're trying to make it work. I don't want to sound like I am coming into this with low expectations, like you said, but I do sometimes fear that I might be. But as I was kind of suggesting earlier, I don't think we can really read this run as the intentionally crafted, planned from the start, all subplots are paying off, Jonathan Hickman style, event that we would like it to be. But, that has almost never happened in Amazing Spider-Man ever. I can't tell you how many times in earlier issues of Amazing Spider-Man over the decades, we would have a character like Kamala Khan, but not necessarily her, maybe it's Betty Brant, go into a warehouse, discover something, and then we wouldn't find out what it is till next issue. If we even found out what it is. Sometimes they just forget it. And it feels like everything's paying off in this. I respect that. And I'm sorry I'm going on for so long, but I just want to add one other key thought here. Zeb Wells writes a damn good comic book page. Like, I know the man is deeply detested by the corners of the internet where people enjoy hating their hobbies more than enjoying them. But you look at the craft here. Every page in this comic teases a little mystery, pays it off on the last panel, connects to the next page in a way that keeps you moving, and there's real surprises and tricks in here. I think it's a really strong, technically proficient, better than competent comic book, but I don't think it's great.
Right.
But it's getting there. It's as close as we can get, I think, with the current regime.
For sure. I think that's a really great breakdown of kind of where we are in Amazing Spider-Man. And maybe it's just that, the fact that there are lofty expectations, some kind of unattainable ideal that's out there. I've been reading this book. I didn't start at 257. I've been reading this book since 297, Alan. So a little bit after you, and I really can't think of a sustained period of that, whatever that ideal is. This is kind of comics. All of the perfect stuff is stuff that predates us by a significant amount of time. So, I'm sure it's kind of like the cast of SNL, I'm sure people at the time thought that those books didn't work either. So there you go. What's with Ditko putting in these protesters? What's that about? Anyway, I digress. Let's talk a little bit about specifically I think the highlight of this comic narratively, of course, is the battle between Spider-Man, Spider-Goblin, whatever we want to refer to him as, and Chasm. For me, and we could talk more specifics about art a little later, but this is where Ed McGuinness really shined. He really, he just really rendered the hell out of these. The fighting between the two of them, the bolts and goo coming out of Ben as he's fighting, and the maniacal, goblin-esque, physicality of Spider-Man here. If I had any kind of complaint here, it's just like you said, there's clearly some putting toys back in the box and trying to get some resolution with Ben, but it's hard for me to say that this has been truly earned in any kind of way. I mean, this character kind of just had a change of heart a couple of issues ago because he went in the Winkler device and then decided, I'm just going to make my life my own now, and he's kind of helping Peter, but he keeps quipping jokes oh yeah, I'm going to help him, or maybe I'm just going to kill him. It's just things like that, and it kind of just shows this uncertainty with the character. I don't know if that's all Zeb Wells, or it's just maybe, like you say, the powers that be kind of trying to keep the door or window open for Ben to do something heinous in 6 months from now. Who knows? But I would have loved a little more cleaner of a resolution here, since that kind of seems to be what they're implying. But otherwise, this is fun stuff. It's a fun battle. It's Peter at his worst. I mean, I'm kind of getting over the trauma, or whatever you want to call it, if you will, of Peter in this state. But I'm also just enjoying the hell out of this fight between the two of them. I mean, did you have any specific visceral reactions to what you saw on the page here with those two? I almost called you Dan, or I did call you Dan, and now I'm going to call you Alan. Do you have any kind of visceral reaction to that, Alan? This is going to be a hard habit to break.
As hard as we and the world are on the Spider Office, I gotta say, I've been buying Amazing Spider-Man in digital form for most of the Wells run, and certainly through the Beyond run. But 50, 51, and 52, I bought in print because it's just too gorgeous. Like, it looks so good.
Yeah.
That first 2-page splash, I often think 2-page splashes are a waste of space. Yeah. But no, that is exactly what we need there. Wells does such a good job of writing to the strengths of writers. And I guess that's part of why I am maybe not the person who should be here. You should have Dan here, because Dan can talk to you all about how the character of Chasm doesn't quite square with where Chasm was previously and in the various Hallows' Eve miniseries, which are pretty fun, by the way. I read those.
Those are good. They're good books.
Those are fun. Yeah. But I really don't get too caught up in that. I'm much too conscious, and maybe this is just from years working at magazines and newspapers. I'm just too self-conscious of, like, they got this book out and it looks this good and it's this fun. Good job, guys. So I apologize for that. Yeah, I am entirely with you that the Chasm characterization, I don't follow it. I don't follow the Winkler device. There's a lot of, I'm taking your word for this, Amazing Spider-Man, going on here. But when it's done with this level of enthusiasm, and it's also, it feels to me like it's not incomprehensible. It feels to me like a couple of boring beats that we all know are coming are just being skipped past.
Yeah.
Like, we're not getting, a flashback showing us that we'll talk about this in a bit, I'm sure, that Spider-Man and Ms. Marvel once made a plan. We're not wasting a couple pages showing us how exactly Chasm got to his kind of new, kinder, gentler self. Hey, Gen X. Instead, we're just getting the stuff we all know is coming, done with vigor and enthusiasm. And I am all for that. I don't understand Spider-Goblin, like, physically what it even is.
Right.
I mean, I've never been clear on where Mask ends and Goblin Face starts. Like, that's always been very confusing to me throughout the entire history of this book. And here, where there is a goblin mask or face on top of the Spider-Man mask, and that goblin mask is capable of, like, true goblin expression, like it's from Peter Jackson's workshop. None of that makes a bit of sense to me. I am happy to hand wave it, though. But as good as Wells is at writing to particular artists, I do feel like this story is kind of should be at a level of intensity that it's not. This fight is nowhere near as intense or as dangerous. As, like, Spider-Goblin does not seem as dangerous as just Peter when he was mad with the goblin sins, as you guys have already discussed in earlier episodes, and certainly not as brutal or terrifying as in the last issue, or in any number of, like, Great Venom issues over the years, or, God, even punching Firelord out so long. Like, the cartoonishness of McGuinness's art is delightful, but I do feel like it doesn't always quite serve the story's level of ferocity.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, like, I also think part of this, too, is just that, I don't want to say we're, like, numb to it per se, but like you said, and Dan and I were talking about this, last issue as well. We got this version of Peter done better with during the Gleason arc, and Craven or Craju a couple of months ago. So, like, it's kind of hard to replicate it, but then, like, just in terms of the beats of this story specifically and how it works with McGuinness's art, I mean, like, he kind of dismantles the Sinister Six in the last issue, and in this one, like, I don't know, like, yeah, I never truly bought that he was going to do anything that bad to Chasm, if you will. You know what I mean? Like, it just felt like, it felt very, well telegraphed that whatever, despite sometimes the words even on the page, it just wasn't going to go into that dark side. So like it's certainly it's certainly a flaw of how the overall story progresses, because you kind of like you're sitting there being like, okay, what's going to be the the MacGuffin or whatever. In this case, it's psychoreactive goo, which I, was unaware of its powers. I don't know if that was established at any point. I'm sure, if Dan was here, he would tell me. And if not Dan, someone in our Slack would. That's why I don't go in there. No, I kid. Anyway, it was just kind of like, oh, all right, yeah, how's old Chasm gonna get his way out of that, and he did, and we kind of move on with that. I did want to talk a little bit about Norman Osborn here, like the Osborn diabolical scheme, which, look, and hey, I'm not necessarily saying I want the exposition on this, but like, it just seems like what we're finding out here is part of his master plan is he's signing over subsidiaries of Oscorp to Peter Parker. He's doing this like on the phone while he's in full Goblin gear, which is curious. Like, he's not even really hiding it, although, he is in his office, so I guess no one can technically see it. But like, we're not even getting like the charade from him anymore. Like, it's just, he's just full blown Goblin. And he also wants the spear. And I'm kind of forgetting too, like, why does he want the spear so badly at this point? I'm not sure. But like, do you have any suspicions about certainly like the plan in terms of giving the businesses over to him? I mean, do you see this as, like my mind went to, we've had stories over the years of like Norman trying to make Peter like his heir of sorts. Do you think it's some of this? Do you think there's something else going on? Or do you think like we're going to find that out in another issue and stop worrying about it, Mark?
I am hopeful that it's a twist, because we've spent several pages on it when there's only 20 pages per book, and 2 of them are a giant chasm spread. I'm hopeful that it's building to something. I also, I am not a summer child anymore, Mark. I am not going to believe that it's building to something big and surprising. That said, I am hopeful, and I think that there is reason to be hopeful that Zeb Wells is doing more here than just killing some pages with a little bit of corporate skullduggery mystery. What surprises me about this, though, and what I appreciate in this comic, is that, yeah, I don't know what's going on with the spear. I can't say that enough times. But what's going on with Norman buying these shell companies, how Kamala is figuring out what's going on with Norman and all of that is really clear and on the page in a way that I think is honestly rare in Spider-Man history.
Yeah, no, I think I think that's fair.
It's not just teaser about something that may or may not pay off in a year.
Right. No, for sure. Any thoughts on Osborn just being like in his full-on Goblin love, or I mean, or do you just feel like, yeah, of course, he's that's where he's at right now?
I mean, there's some interesting stuff happening here, I think, where, it feels like the book is both suggesting that, no, he's full Goblin, and also, wait, this might not be the real Norman Osborn, and also, wait, we might not just be reverting back to the classic Norman Osborn status quo. And I'm not teasing out the hints. I'm not Dan. I'm not going to tell you how this jacket Kindred is wearing looks like one Mary Jane wore once. No, I'm not doing that. But there's hints here that I think this might actually be building to something. I think one difference between the book right now, say in periods of the Spencer run, is that we have more to talk about than just these hints.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. We're not, this is not just like, how is this teaser, let's break this teaser down 40 different ways. And like you said, I appreciate that. I appreciate that we're just getting a clear, concise story. So we'll see. But I'm gonna segue. I did it again. I'm gonna segue, Alan. If you were to say want to relive the multi-tier analysis of hints and teasers, a place to do that would be our amazing Spider Talk Slack. I wouldn't know because I'm there like once every 4 months or so, which I am due. But if Dan hasn't already announced this in the Slack, which, knowing him, he probably just did like a drive-by and like tagged me or whatever. I do want to admit, or not admit, I want to reveal to everyone who follows us in the Slack and elsewhere that we're going to be covering Ultimate Spider-Man on this podcast going forward. That's right. That is right. Ultimate Spider-Man, the book that everyone seems to love. Except now people are starting to turn against it, I saw recently, because they feel like Mary Jane doesn't have enough to do. Can you believe it, Alan? They're turning on it. They're turning on a Spider-Man book. But Dan and I, anytime we talk about this in a Substack or whatever, y'all love it. You always want to talk about it on the Slack. We're through the first act of the first arc of Ultimate. We're going to start on the second arc, reviewing it issue by issue, the way we do with ASM. Lord help me. Alan, what do you think about Ultimate Spider-Man?
I've only read 2 of them so far because other than Amazing Spider-Man, I pretty much only read Marvel on Unlimited. And the first 2 issues, they were really strong. I enjoyed them a lot. But not enough to go out and buy them as they're coming out monthly. And also, I just kind of feel like this is like the 3rd or 4th series we've had where there's a married Peter and Mary Jane in the future. I respect Hickman. I expect he's building it to somewhere interesting and surprising. He always is. But I don't know, man. Maybe you guys could have supported some of those earlier books if you want this so much.
And there you have it. Alan chimes in. So wait for that on the podcast. In the meantime, if you want to buzz about this in our Slack, it's free to join. It's full of great conversations. It's not like toxic like Twitter, or not yet at least. Give it time. No, I'm kidding. Slack is great. All right, Alan, let's go back to our review here. I do want to talk about what I will refer to as the B-cast. Alan, I'm gonna reveal some sausage making here before this show. You more or less said that you had some choice words for how Dan and I tear apart long-standing supporting cast member Kamala Khan and her integration into this book. This is your soapbox. I'm setting it up for you. Let me have it, Alan.
I don't want to Gen X on you guys, but we have no Dan here, so, we may as well let it smell like a Lollapalooza in here for just a moment. And, Mark, do you remember, like, the 90s, like, when you might, like, turn on, like, David Letterman or Jay Leno, and they do Buttafuoco sure. or Judge Ito jokes again and again and again?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
When I hear
Love
you guys...
me some Joey Buttafuoco jokes.
When I hear you guys... I thought it was very, very funny the first few times you guys did the long-time recurring cast member Kamala Khan, because that was a really good gag. But she was shoehorned in originally. But that was like, what, 26, 27 issues ago? and she's back, and she's being written in character. And it's clear that the creators are trying to make up some for the way she was handled last time, maybe because of criticism like your guys's. And it's also clear that it's building to something, and it also just like makes sense for her in a storyline where Peter has alienated all of his other superhero friends and hasn't really made up with them yet. That impressionable young Kamala Khan, who he's teamed up with several times in this book and in hers, well before this, it makes perfect sense that she, a young science genius who certainly could be, well, not genius, but she's good, certainly could be, an intern at Oscorp, that she might be into this, and that she might be keeping track on what's going on in Jersey City, and that she's worried about the superhero community. It was ridiculous that she was killed in the book, but that doesn't mean anything to me in the way I tend to read these books, and the way I tend to read endless, ongoing, corporate comic books that don't have a strong authorial intent, like Ryan North's Fantastic Four. I don't read this way because it's clear that Ryan North has been given total freedom to do what he wants to do. But when I'm reading something like ASM, I read it in the permanent present of the current issue. And in the permanent present of the current issue, she's here, it makes sense that she's here, and Wells is writing her, doing the kind of sleuthing stuff that might go to Mary Jane, might go to Betty Brant, might go to somebody else sometimes, might go to Black Cat. But here it's going to her, and it doesn't feel unnatural to me. So, to me, Wells is taking the right approach here. The kind of thing I remember arguing on this show that I wish writers would take back during the Spencer run. You can call it a retcon, you can call it a sleight of hand that Kamala Khan is in the book these days, but he's doing a better job of it than the book did 25 issues ago. He's making better stories that didn't work earlier in the run. He's building on them to make them better. He's not like going back and attacking the foundations of them with some complicated, convoluted continuity fix. I like that. I can just hear Dan saying, unearned, unearned. He's like the Raven in Poe, except he says unearned. With 20 pages per issue, I don't need Miss Marvel and Spider-Man in a flashback saying, let's meet here when Norman goes bad one day. I'm not saying this is good comic book writing, but I'm saying we've had a lot worse.
All I'm going to say in terms of your joke about my inability to let my commentary about long-standing supporting cast member Kamala Khan die is like, much like Norm Macdonald telling an OJ joke. I just got to go for it every time, Alan. I mean, like that is this is my generation, and I will refuse to like not let the bit go down. So like anyway, but you're right. I will begrudgingly say you're right that like this is clearly the status quo. She is a part of this story. It has been consistently so at this point. Like whenever we bring in the Oscorp hijinks, Kamala Khan is there. So, we got to let it go. But, like that's what NBC said to Norm, and then they fired him from Weekend Update and made him a pariah. So, I mean, like, what are we going to do? So,
I am not NBC
with
executives.
That all being... With all that being said, I do feel, and this has nothing to do with who the cast members are, but I do kind of feel like the B cast here, their narrative is kind of stalled out a little bit in this book. I don't know, like I just kind of feel like, especially we have that huge reveal in 50 with like the living brain becoming the walking brain, and like it's just it kind of just feels very much like chapters 2 and 3 of the Lord of the Rings movies right now, where they're just kind of walking up a mountain together and not really doing anything. I'm insulting that trilogy now. I don't know. Do you feel like there is still momentum with these characters? Because like I just kind of feel like they're all sitting around like talking to each other, sharing doing exposition and not much else. Like I'm not getting a sense of what the action is here and what role they're going to play outside of just kind of being like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern right now and observing everything.
I said earlier that Zeb Wells writes a really strong comic page, and he's written some really strong issues of Amazing Spider-Man too, and he's written some great stuff before Amazing Spider-Man, like stuff just like Spencer, stuff that is just like unimpeachably so good that you should put that guy in Amazing Spider-Man. But a lot of times he writes great pages and even great scenes, but the issue itself doesn't quite hang together. And structurally, this issue is a climactic fight that should be the most exciting thing, intercut with a gathering the team, like getting everybody back together from earlier in the run, surprising people you don't expect to show up. And the two, it just feels like kind of disjointed. Like these two threads aren't nearly as exciting as each other. And when you cut from something very exciting to something incredibly mundane, or when you cut from something incredibly exciting to something goofy as hell and maybe not that compelling, you're entering George Lucas prequel territory, not Lord of the Rings, my friend.
Here we go. We're coming after everyone. No, and I get what you're saying. It's just, but it's also just like, they're basically like the walking brain is like, okay, here's what's going on. Osborn is giving his subsidiaries to Peter, and it's like, yeah, we already saw that like 10 pages ago. Like we're recapping what we've already seen. So it's not even like they're revealing more parts of the narrative to drive it forward. I just kind of feel like everything is just kind of stalled on that thing. And it's funny because I said earlier in this podcast, like, oh, Zeb is doing a great job kind of moving the pieces forward. And I think when it comes to like the Spider-Man action, he is. But like I definitely kind of feel like there's some wheel spinning going on here. With that, at the same time, maybe the appearance of rek-rap is what's meant to kind of charge that up, because obviously, like, rek-rap showing up, and like I gotta say, it cracks me up every time. I go back to whatever his first appearance, issue 16 or 17 or whatever it was, and Dan, Dapper Dan saying rek-rap's great. I never have to see him again after this, and Zeb Wells and the Spider Office are just like, hold my beer. You're gonna get like 2 more arcs with him, and now he's gonna like figure into this like magnum opus storyline with Norman and the Goblin and all that. But that is my hope right now, is that rek-rap is going to be kind of the charge, because otherwise this battery's kind of running on empty right now. Did you seem delighted by rek-rap? What did you think of that whole sequence?
I don't think I'm delighted by rek-rap, but I was feeling a bit of the, okay, we got everybody together, what's going to happen? And instead of something happening, it's more people showing up. And, that's the Spider-Verse problem in the comics, not in the movies. In the movies, things happen. In the Spider-Verse comics, as you guys have pointed out many times, you get a whole lot of spider people standing around. And, that's kind of what's happening here. But he didn't burn too many pages on it. I agree with you. It is redundant to have the walking brain, explain what we just read 10 pages ago when we haven't explained psychoreactive goo. When it's, like that's not explaining a psychoreactive goo is kind of like if you made a Popeye cartoon, like the first one ever, and just didn't bother explaining the spinach. Like, it's just in there, and you're just like, people will go with it. And that's what I'm doing here, I admit. But yeah, he didn't waste more pages on it, though. Like, I feel okay with it. But rek-rap is this is the best thing I can say about this part of the Wells run. Every other time I've been on this show, I find myself constantly saying, well, it feels like maybe it's trending the right direction. Maybe it'll work out. Rek-rap is the only thing in this issue I feel like I can say that about. Everything else feels like it is going in the right direction, and that there is an end game in plan that I can't quite see what it is, but I feel like, okay, you guys know what you're doing. Rek-rap is a true wild card. I would love it if he is killed and then just has a long afterlife as an unlockable costume in video games I'll never play. But no, he's probably around.
Yeah, and definitely, again, akin to what we were saying earlier in the show, indicative of the fact that this is kind of the final swan song for a creator here. He's bringing out all of the he's playing the hits, or rek-rap being a hit, your mileage may vary. I'm a big Billy Joel fan, but I detest Allentown. I know some people love Allentown. Rek-rap might be Allentown to people. Some people are just going to stand and cheer, and I'm just going to be like, he wrote this about a Long Island town and then just changed the name, right? Whatever. I digress. I don't even know where I was going with that. You talked about Popeye, and I started thinking, like, he's not going to start quoting, like, the Robert Altman film, right? Because, like, no one talks about that. And that would be, like, full-on, like, 80s fun. All right.
If we could digress, if
Alan,
you
I
will
want to
allow
just like.
one more digression, just one more digression.
Of course.
In my career as a journalist and critic, I once interviewed Billy Joel because he donated a couple $1,000s to a jazz club during COVID. And I got on the phone with him and talked to him for a couple minutes. And he gave a long answer about why he loves jazz in New York City. And I said after he was done talking, I said, that was really well said, as I'm like ready to take the notes as fast as I can. And he says, Alan, I'm a lyricist. Cut that out if you want to. I just wanted to tell Mark that.
No, I that must stay in, everyone. This is the new world order. If anyone cuts that, you're off the show. All right, Alan, we talked a bit about McGuinness earlier. Again, I thought his Spidey Chasm stuff was great. However, I'm going to ding this issue a little bit. You know, we've been dealing with this kind of like dual artist thing with McGuinness and Todd Nauck doing like the living brain stuff for the last few issues, and for the most part, I've kind of liked the dichotomy of the styles. And you know, maybe this is just reflecting the fact that like I really did not enjoy the B-cast moments of this book, but like this really felt. It felt kind of dry and drab to me artistically as well. The having the two, you know, like I think McGuinness was blowing him so far out of the water that it just like the fact that you had two distinct styles within the same book really felt apparent here, and as a result, it kind of felt a little disjointed and jarring to me as a reader. Did any of that come through to you, or was it just kind of akin to what you dealt with the last two issues on this?
It felt to me like going from an incredibly exciting and well-directed widescreen action movie like Fury Road to like an MCU show where we get a lot of people standing around and talking, and it's not bad. It's technically fine. It's proficient. He's doing a good job. I keep blah blah blah. But there's, you know, I don't know how much better he could have made that stuff. You know, there's a lot of words, there's a lot of ideas, a lot of characters, a lot of weird concepts that I don't know that you could get all that in there and have it be coherent if it were more exciting. But yeah, I mean, it should be a little more. I mean, the living brain stuff has been pretty good all along, I thought. But I don't know, Jonah in the Arms should be more prominent, more exciting, more surprising, more fun. Because that is a crazy concept that I think is being a little too underutilized here so far. And then also, yeah, I mean, rek-rap gets a big page. But other than that, it is a little drab.
Yeah. All right. Well, Alan, before we kind of wrap up this conversation and give our grades, I did want to talk about the other 800-pound gorilla in the room, and we've talked about it, we've referred to it a few times already this episode, but like obviously we are in the end game of the Zeb Wells run here. Marvel announced earlier this week, as we're recording this, that Zeb is going to be leaving the book after issue number 60, which is going to be his last Tombstone story. Dan, of course, claims he had the inside track on this all along. He's been telling me for the better part of a year and a half he's going to leave around 60. So, I mean, God bless you, Dan. I don't know who has those kind of rumors like locked and loaded, but Dan Gavazin has them. Me, on the other hand, like I wasn't necessarily like tracking it that closely. I actually am like, I'm thinking to myself, wow, he's been around for 60 issues plus beyond. I mean, like I kind of count those as being kind of an extension of this run. Like, it's a pretty prodigious run. And he certainly has had an impact, and we're not going to get into the full legacy of it. But like, just curious, certainly through the prism of this arc, but also just overall, what were your thoughts on the Zeb news, and do you have any thoughts on who could possibly take his place or want to take his place on this book?
I have thoughts more on the latter than the former. And I want to preface this by saying that I feel like every time I've come on this show ever, it's been post-Superior. And post-Superior, every time I come on this show, except for the end of the Spencer run. I'm always sounding a note of cautious optimism. Guys, I think this might be getting better. I think we might be getting to where this is like a consistently good and engaging and exciting book again. And I think Zeb Wells has brought us closer to that than anybody else. And I worry sometimes, reading it, that maybe this issue, which I think is pretty good, maybe this is about as good as it's possible for an issue to be the way Marvel is doing things these days. And that's nothing against Zeb Wells. I think a lot of the people online who perform their hatred of the Zeb Wells run with such zeal, I think that what they really hate is the status quos that Zeb Wells is working with, and they blame him for them, which to me is like blaming the guy who puts your Chipotle burrito together for the quality of the steak. It can only work with the ingredients he's given, people. We've had 2 long, inconsistent, frustrating, controversial runs in a row. And they've both come from smart, talented comics writers who both clearly struggled with the pace of writing ASM. They've struggled with the need to tie in and generate big events. And most crushingly, I think, they've struggled with the need to write to editorial mandate, to satisfy the edicts set down by corporate bosses who I presume are above the Spider office. I don't think Nick Lowe is the reason Peter is not married to Mary Jane, people. And I think Wells has handled this pressure better than Spencer did. And he's written some strong issues and stories and a load of great scenes and pages, even when the issues and stories have been a little iffy. But I think that poor Zeb Wells' run was doomed from the start for reasons that aren't his fault. And this podcast interview with Cody Ziegler confirmed what a lot of, I think, smarter readers already suspected. It's not Zeb Wells or even the Spider Office who makes the story decisions that fans hate. So my guess, and this is speculation, my guess is that the first job for the new writer of Amazing Spider-Man, after Spencer, after Beyond, my guess is the first thing you had to do when you got that job was to submit a plan to break up Peter and MJ again, and then work that plan over with the Spider Office and make it in a way that doesn't involve Satan and doesn't involve either character being bad to each other. And that's where they started Wells. That's the trap he was started in. How do you break them up with neither character being at fault? And that's how you wind up with story decisions like Paul, like Mary Jane with random ass kids, like time displacement, like all these random and unsatisfying convolutions that are so off emotionally and so far removed from what any reader wants out of a Spider-Man book that the Spider Office took a year and over 20 issues to even reveal what the status quo was, probably because they knew everybody was going to hate it that much. And so now Zeb Wells gets death threats, just like Dan Slott used to get death threats. And that's the kind of thinking that was how we got to Mephisto in the first place. That's the kind of thinking is how we got Jackpot. An idea that seems... I can't think of an idea that feels more like a dumb note from an executive than Jackpot. And Jackpot, as you guys know, has been kicking around in his books for almost a decade now without anybody ever committing to the idea, but they introduced her in that Free Comic Book Day and I don't know, is it Mary Jane, is it not? I don't know, do you know, reader? They're saddling these writers with terrible ideas and then letting the writers get torched and roasted online for it, and not even sticking up for the writers. So how can a writer tell a compelling Peter Parker story when they have to do so much ugly, stupid brand management and generate all of these slot-like alternative Spider-Men for future brand exploitation? And it's a miracle that Wells has told as many good stories as he has, despite inheriting things that no reader likes, like Chasm, or no reader understands, like The Sins of Norman Osborn. And I'll just add this. Remember how Dan and I were so excited that Kelly Thompson was going to be writing some issues? And then her Beyond issues, they were okay. They were fine. And Dan and I were raving about all her other Marvel work. In the couple years since Kelly Thompson wrote those kind of Beyond issues, She's been nominated for multiple Eisners, like so many Eisners this year, all for great books, including Birds of Prey over at DC, which deals with the Batman universe and its own impossibly convoluted continuity. In this year's Eisner's nominations, DC has 4 books nominated for Best Ongoing Series. Marvel has none. Marvel also has no series nominated in the miniseries category, in the new series category, and that's not the fault of Marvel's writers. Whatever is going on in the Spider Office, whatever is going on at Marvel, Kelly Thompson can't write a good Amazing Spider-Man issue. Kelly Thompson can't. And she's like the best writer in the game right now. That's not the fault of the writers. That's something deeper. So I feel like seizing the cursed chalice that is Amazing Spider-Man as a writer might not be good for your career. I don't know if any of these guys are going to want to do it. I think writing Amazing Spider-Man is like being a woman in a Star War. Like, sure, you get paid, but dudes are going to rain hell down upon you for the rest of your life.
Well said. All I will add to that is, and I was reminded of this, someone like posted this online the other day, and I was like, Chip Zdarsky would rather write Batman and deal with that pressure than write another issue of Spider-Man, because people are always like, Chip, he did Spectacular, and he had that, that one big Eisner issue towards the end of his run. Why can't they get him to do it? He doesn't want to do it. And yes, some of that is pointed towards the fans, but I'm sure it's a lot bigger than that. And the bottom line is, like, if you're not going to get people with that kind of talent to want to commit to doing a book like this, then this is the run that we're getting right now is like you said, is probably the high watermark of what we should expect at this point, which is going to be like, if you could just kind of untether yourself from the rage bait that certain solicits get out of you or whatever. Like, just these are just kind of straightforward stories with some weird status quo shifts because reasons, but for the most part the action itself is pretty much just like, well, Spider-Man does this, and then this happens. Like, it's not going to be much more complex than that anymore at this point. So yeah, this is where we're going to be at. Alan, anything else to add to that, or do we want to do our grades here?
I feel like I went from Mr. Positivity to Mr. Nothing Else Matters Anymore. And, that's what Amazing Spider-Man will do to you over the course of a life.
I mean, you are the all singing, all dancing shit of the earth or whatever. I mean, Gen X. Come on, this is you are the generation of nihilism, Alan. So
I'll just make one more Gen X affiliated analogy. I felt like, during the Spencer run, during Beyond, that it was kind of like when The Simpsons hit seasons like 13, 14, 15, where I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's getting better. And now it's like, I don't know. The Simpsons never at least leveled out the way this run has. So, good for you, Zeb Wells run. You are better than late era Simpsons.
There you go. That we at least you're better than late era Simpsons. All right. I'm gonna give a grade here. I'm gonna give this a B minus. I mean, Alan, maybe you think that's too harsh, but I think that's a respectable score. That's where it's a B minus book. You're more than passing. What do you think, Alan?
I'm going to go B because of 2 factors. One, Zeb Wells just continually writes a good page. Every page in this book is a really good page, except maybe that late one with everybody conferring right before rek-rap is introduced. But that one builds to the introduction of rek-rap, and it does. If you look back at the page, it's pretty nicely done, despite some redundant dialogue. The other reason is the thing I mentioned earlier, that it feels to me like the book is not going to skid out into an unreadable mess for a couple issues like it has done all those other times before. So, great. It feels like we're not going to have a bunch of continuity cleanup miniseries after this is done. Wells is like, he's like when I cook. When I cook in my house, I clean up after myself. Thank you, Zeb Wells. You're cleaning up after yourself. B, baby.
Very nice. Very nice. We all should wish to have a significant other who cleans up after themselves when they cook, because that's not me. All right. It's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk. And of course, thanks again to Available Alan for filling in for Dan. Alan, you are such a delight to have on this show, and for all we know, there might be more. So I'm not going to make this sound like it's one and done. Dan's driving. He was at the Grand Canyon today, apparently. Maybe he's just going to stay there for the next month. We don't know. So Alan, we'll we're not saying goodbye. We're just saying thank you for this time, and maybe we're going to be thanking you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you, guys. That is the essence of availability. This podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same week the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. Thank you to everyone who already supports us and the work that we do. Plus, we want to extend a special thanks to our newest contributor, Jordan Rannells.
Thank you, Jordan. Polite applause. The Amazing Spider Talk show really wants to increase all the awesome work we do in the second half of 2024. So if you're already a patron or want to become one, please help us meet our goals and make this a better podcast by considering supporting our show. Just go to amazingspidertalk.com and click on the big Patreon button to get started. So Alan, until I twist your neck until radioactive psychotic goo pours out of your ears, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.